All right, we're coming into Dev Diary number 65 here for Crusader Kings 3, and it's a pretty big one. This is going to crack into a lot of the new cultural stuff that we discovered in the last Dev Diary. Now, I did not cover Dev Diary number 64, but just to give you a quick rehash of it, you get some major cultural pillars, 5 main cultural pillars that are going to be added into the game. And they cover ethos, heritage, language, martial custom, and finally aesthetics. These things will essentially make up your culture, very similar to the way it does for a religion. And you can now have different hybridizations and divergence of cultures, which we'll be covering in today's Dev Diary. So as a quick little kind of I guess Spark Notes version or upfronting of knowledge of what this Dev Diary covers, essentially you can hybridize your culture, and you can say, hey, you know, I've got these 2 cultures as a predominant fixture of my kingdom, my civilization, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to take these 2 cultures and mash them together. And you can borrow different portions of each culture's pillars and make your own culture. And also you can have a divergent culture, which is very similar to a cadet branch of a family. It's kind of an easy way to compare it, in that as long as you've got a culture and you are part of a location, you can create a divergent culture of that with specific traditions that you want to highlight, so on and so forth. So that's the kind of upfront bit of information on this Dev Diary. It really does cover a ton of hybridization and how you can take those individual pillars and pull stuff from each culture to make a new parent culture. A new hybrid culture of the 2 parent cultures. So if you don't want to watch anymore, I'm going to put the link in the description so you can go ahead and read through the Dev Diary as you so wish. This way, you know, you just get an idea of what's coming without any kind of big spoilers. I just wanted to, as always, upfront that knowledge before we jump into the lion's share of the information here. But let's get started on the entirety of Dev Diary number 65. And there's a lot to cover here. It's a pretty dense Dev Diary. And I'll be referencing Dev Diary number 64 throughout this. You can see I've gotten the things kind of bookmarked. I will say, since I'm using the display capture to do this, this whole portion is going to follow me as we go down. So I apologize if it's annoying. I just felt like if I was at this level of zoom, it wasn't close enough. So I apologize for the annoying visuals, but we'll be highlighting some of the big things we're going to talk about, and forming a hybrid culture is obviously going to be the first one. So forming a hybrid culture is a way for you to meld the aspects of your current culture with that of another in any way you so choose. So there are some restrictions on this, and there's 3 big ones. So let's look at those. So first, the culture you want to form a hybrid with has to be present within your realm. Secondly, you'll need a certain amount of cultural acceptance, and cultural acceptance was covered in Dev Diary number 64 here. But essentially, cultural acceptance is the mutual acceptance between a new culture and the parent culture. And there are 2 ways for acceptance to change. The first is an acceptance baseline, which increases if 2 cultures share similarities with one another. There are a number of different modifiers that can increase the baseline, such as cultures that share the same religion or faith, ethos, or language. The most impactful modifier, however, is heritage. If 2 cultures share the same heritage, they have a significant bonus to their baseline. Secondly, acceptance very much changes depending on the circumstances. Don't expect 2 cultures that never interact with one another to gain acceptance. If cultures exist within the same realm, though, it will increase over time. So cultural acceptance is going to be a huge portion of the new cultural developments we're getting with CK3. And when we take a look here at the new culture screen, we get the traditions, the cultural pillars. We have all the innovations that are linked to this culture, of course, but these cultural pillars are going to be pretty key, as well as the traditions, to determining how that acceptance works and what you can pull from when you do hybridization, which we'll get into in just a little bit here. So the third circumstance, though, is you cannot hybridize with a culture of the same heritage as you. So there is a little bit of a restriction there when you're trying to make a hybrid culture. So Once you do make a culture, though, you can then choose a name for it. You can choose any name under the sun, but there is a default naming convention that the game will follow. We pick a default name that is a combination of the two cultures you are attempting to hybridize, such as Andaluso-French, Andalusia and French in France, or Greco-Persian. For added immersion and flavor, however, we have a set of names that can appear depending on which cultures you hybridize or where you are creating your new culture. For example, hybridizing a culture of Frankish heritage with one of a Central Germanic heritage in the area and surrounding Lotharingia, you can have a culture named Rhinelander. So I think that's a really, really cool little bit of both history and love poured into how these hybrid cultures work, where it's not just simply, okay, we're going to slap a bunch of hyphens on everything that you create and that's your new culture. It can actually have a really cool thematic twist to it, naming convention to it. Like, Frankish heritage with a Central Germanic heritage becomes Rhinelander. And I love that. It's all really dependent upon the heritage and the geographical location, which we'll see becomes pretty important with divergent cultures. So starting with the pillars, remember this is one of the new things that is going to be brought in. We get these pillars are pretty much the main cultural pillars that distinguish your culture. And those cultural pillars, one more time, are ethos, heritage, language, martial custom, and then finally aesthetics. And those things are going to be basically what determine your overall culture. So you can freely pick between the two cultures' pillars, mixing ethos, heritage, language, and martial customs as you'd like. So again, for example, you can pick heritage from culture A and language from culture B. One caveat is that you have to pick at least one pillar from each culture. And this is what that screen would look like, right? You would choose the ethos, you would choose the heritages, that's a word, right? What are your heritages? What is your heritage your languages, your language or your martial custom. Now, one cool thing about language is that they did say that you can have multiple languages. You can learn multiple languages. And we kind of saw this already in Crusader Kings 3 when your vassals would say, hey, would you like to learn this language? It converts you to this culture. Well, that little situation now is going to result in you just learning the language without converting to the culture. And it's probably going to affect your cultural acceptance within your culture if you're butting up against another culture that you've learned the language of. So for example, let's just use these two. If you learn this language, it might help out with dealing with any Scythians in your territory and cultural acceptance, so on and so forth. So I really like how they're expanding culture to really have a big effect on the game. We see this a lot when we look at games like Stellaris, which have a bunch of species and other things that intersect with your galactic empire, and they've brought that in for Crusader Kings 3. And I don't know if it was in Crusader Kings 2. I imagine it was in some varying form. I didn't play enough CK2 to know that. So this might be something that for older fans of the series might be saying, yeah, this is in CK2, stoked to see it in 3. But this is, again, a kind of display of bringing two cultures together. You've got the ethos and everything and so on and so forth. Now, the same principle applies to traditions. Now, traditions, again, are the new ones that you can bring in. It's kind of like when you think of religion, it's like those tenets, those top 3 tenets. You can pick which traditions you want to keep from either culture as long as you don't go above the slot limit. And you can also leave slots open to, adapt new traditions in that new hybrid culture, which is really cool too. Some traditions are unique to certain cultures, regions, or heritage, however. So this is the only chance you might have to acquire traditions that normally would be out of your reach, which is kind of cool, right? You get some of that style of like gotta catch them all when it comes to traditions, and you go and try to create a hybrid culture of a culture that has a very specific, unique tradition that you're going after. You can go and pursue that culture, bring them into your realm, and then hopefully create this hybrid culture from there, which I think is really cool, right? It's almost like trying to add longships into your culture because you have done a hybrid culture with someone who is Norse, and that way you get longships as a part of your new hybrid culture. And I really love that that is a way to really kind of bring, again, those innovations, that would be an innovation, that innovation into your culture if you are not Norse. I think it makes the game, it kind of unlocks portions of the game that were previously gated by a culture, perhaps. So aesthetics work in the same way. You are free to pick and choose all the subcomponents from either culture. For some of the categories, you're even able to choose a hybrid option using the present from both cultures. And aesthetics are a really cool thing that we see being added to cultures as well. We'll jump down to this, and you can see how this affects naming practices, the architecture that you see on the map and in the menus, and the actual military equipment of the soldiers that move across the map. So you can choose, Indian or Arabic. The naming practices, you can choose one or the other or a hybrid, and then the architecture is again one or the other. And this will extend also to coat of arms and the stylization behind the actual clothes those characters wear, which I really like. I like how they've really expanded this into fashion and coat of arms. I would like to see what this looks like. We'll use fashion from both cultures. We'll use coats of arm elements from both cultures. I would like to see what that, like, okay, if I press this button, am I going to get the field of the Indo-Aryan with the symbol of the Iranian? Or is it going to be just, hey, we'll pull certain subsets of field and symbols that are gated behind both cultures respectively, and those will be the new coat of arms. So I'd like to see how that plays itself out, because I know coat of arms are a large point of contention for a lot of CK3 players, in that they want to be able to choose those coat of arms for any character that they make through the character creator. So I would, again, like to just see how this hybrid looks to be able to choose it, right? Like if I'm choosing Indian or Arabic, I know exactly what I'm getting. Same thing here. But if I press hybrid, I kind of want to know what that might possibly look like, or at least just say, this is a preview of possibilities, something that it gives me an idea of what's going on. But still, pretty damn awesome nonetheless. So just like religion, it does cost piety to do a new religion. And it's the same here for a hybrid culture. This time it would cost prestige. And the prestige cost is locked behind certain factors. The initial so it's not very expensive. It relies on having enough cultural acceptance to be valid. And cultural acceptance is going to be the biggest portion of informing your hybrid culture, because that will then help reduce the cost of the culture, and it helps you actually spread the hybrid culture throughout your land. And I really like this next part coming up here. So the initial size of a hybrid culture on the map also depends on the acceptance you've built up between the two cultures. If you decide to hybridize at the lowest required acceptance level, the hybrid will start out rather small. Rulers of hybrid cultures have a much easier time using the Promote Culture Council task in counties belonging to either of its parent cultures for a set amount of years after it's been formed. So what I like about that is, when you make a new religion, you go about the process of doing it, you reform the religion, or you make a new one, whatever you're going to do, if it's a pagan religion or if it's already a Abrahamic faith and you're looking to make a branch of it, whatever it is. You convert the vassals that like you a lot, and that goes through. You have a chance to convert the other ones. Maybe they don't, maybe they do go through. And as of patch 1.2, I want to say, they no longer automatically just convert their whole land. They have to do it themselves. Now, what I like about this is that if I do create this hybrid culture, I'm not going to be fighting a constant war of dealing with not independence factions, but dealing with populist factions that are part of a portion of the parent culture. I get a bonus to promote culture because I'm trying to promote my hybrid culture in the parent culture locations. I love that because it makes it a lot easier. You don't feel like you're being penalized for using this new mechanic, which is really cool and really like flavorful. So I really enjoy this, especially if we take a look at it from a from a historical point of view. Cultures are something that are more often than not, especially as it comes to the kind of recalibrating of borders, as it were, over the centuries of this time period in specific. Cultures are just simply like something that was created to easily describe the kind of amalgamation of people in the general location for historians after the fact. Cultures were very fluid at this time. You have a lot of influence of old Greco from antiquity, of old Roman from antiquity. You have, especially when you take a look at stuff like the Persian and then future Turkish empires, you look at so much influence from Anatolia and Byzantines, from the old Bactrians, from from Afghanistan, from the Indus River Valley and into India. You have so much stuff influencing this one portion of history, this one portion of geography, and it creates a very interesting culture. And I like how the game pulls that out. We get divergent cultures that you can create, just kind of. A divergent culture is essentially a culture that deviates from their original culture, allowing you the opportunity to shape it as you see fit. But as you come into this portion, we find that the AI actually has a chance to do so. So when it comes to a divergent culture, you can pick and choose any ethos. Language won't have any additional options for you most of the time. Martial custom can be changed as long as you fulfill the conditions for them, which would include things such as having a corresponding succession law. And then aesthetics will also rarely have additional options except in some historical cases. Diverging from Norse and Sweden, for example, will give you access to Swedish aesthetics. So diverging your culture, you'll really be able to choose any ethos you want. You will have near no options for language. Martial custom is going to be gated behind certain conditions, and aesthetics will have rare cases in which you can actually choose new ones. So for the most part, you're, like I said, not breaking away from the parent culture, but you're making a divergent culture by changing a couple things, but it's still overly the same culture at the end of the day. So you have to change at least one pillar in order to diverge your culture. Most of the time, you won't have a lot of valid alternatives for the additional pillars, so your only option will be to change your ethos. And then you have all those options here. Again, ethos is pretty huge. Now, are you warlike? Are you spiritual? So on and so forth. But traditions can be replaced with something new as long as you're able to afford the tradition cost. Unlike hybridization, you will have plenty of options and can replace a tradition with any other tradition that your culture fulfills the requirements of. So very requirement driven when it comes to new traditions versus hybridization, which is a little less so. And then diverging also costs prestige. Here, the cost scales on how much of your own culture you control. Attempting to diverge Greek as Byzantium will be fairly expensive. Meanwhile, attempting to diverge a small part of your culture, such as a small Andalusian emir on the Iberian Peninsula, will be significantly cheaper. Then what this results in is dynamic cultural emergence, which is the AI taking advantage of this mechanic. So over the course of a campaign, cultures may diverge depending on their situation. And there are many factors that go into this, such as the culture's size, if the culture is united under strong rulers, etc. So what I like about that is it makes it so that if you have, say, the Byzantine Empire, you don't get a bunch of divergent cultures, because the game will try to lock in the quote-unquote heartland. So for example, divergences also do not appear in the capital lands of the culture head in order to safeguard what is most likely the heartland of the culture. And then it gives examples here of how the Greeks, a large culture, but with politically all counties of its culture united under one ruler, they tend to not diverge unless territories go independent. So it kind of keeps things somewhat cohesive and somewhat kind of on point without it just being a huge map of divergent cultures that is just a wild mess. And hybridization, on the other hand, is something powerful rulers strive towards. So again, you'll see powerful rulers trying to do hybrid cultures that'll pop up across the map. They'll try and increase cultural acceptance until they're eligible for hybridization too. So it's not just you, the player, doing it. By default, the AI will not create hybrids of hybrids unless historical hybrids such as, I don't want to mispronounce the word, but I'm going to do it, Maghrebi or English, as the naming schemes can quickly go out of hand. Though if you'd like the AI to do this, there's a game rule so you can enable it. And then these events will most often happen for cultures that have certain traditions that allow them to more easily create hybrids with other cultures. So at least the AI doing it will try to make it make sense as much as possible geographically, historically, whatever the pretense is, which I really enjoy. And we can see the game rules here. You have a choice of how you want to do this, how the AI will take advantage of hybrid cultures and divergent cultures, so on and so forth. But we can now see some examples of this. So basically, Paradox just said, hey, we put the game on observer mode and we let it run for 200 years. We started at 867, and this is what happened in all the British Isles. So Anglo-Norse hybrid culture emerged in 918. Cumbro-Norse hybrid culture formed in 948. Norse Gael, a hybrid culture, emerged in 1029. And you can also see that English has largely replaced Anglo-Saxon as the dominant culture in England. So here you go. You can see that Norse Gael, the Cumbro-Norse, Anglo-Norse. Oh yeah, Anglo-Norse? Yeah, Anglo-Norse. So again, you see culture being very dynamic and way less static than it was prior, right? For the most part, you had maybe if Scots really kind of took off, it did a little bit and expanded out. But for the most part, you saw, Irish, Gaelic, Anglo-Saxon, and then Brythonic until it was kind of wiped away. Well, Cumbrian, sorry, that's Brythonic. And as you look down here into the lands we were just talking about, right, that kind of intersection between Anatolia, the Levant over here on the far left, Persia, and everything like that, you can see how diverse these cultures are. And this is what I was talking about, where you have a soup of cultures and less of an actual clear boundary of like, hey, this is where the Anglo-Saxons came in and established their culture over the eastern shores, the British Isles, and so on and so forth. So I thought, this is English right there, and I thought that it was saying there was an English culture right there. I'm like, man, that's kind of wild. But starting in 867, going for 100 years, you can see that this is what happened, right? A divergent culture here, a divergent culture here, a hybrid culture, another Persian divergence, and another Persian divergence leads to all of this, which I really like. It makes this land way harder to, just control under one big, huge kingdom. You have to work a lot more on your cultural acceptance, and it creates more of a challenge for these locations, which I find really good. It's too often very easy to just match everyone up with your culture and your religion, and there you go. I've reached the end game. I've got a mega empire where if they didn't convert to my culture or my religion, I just killed them. So, I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be ways to power game this and min-max it, but I really like that this has so much more flavor to the cultural background. And even what we just saw in Dev Diary 63, if we only got what they were talking about with the new pillars, the traditions, and the aesthetics, great. But now that we can hybridize and diverge with these cultures, it's really going to make the map really crazy with a lot of different nuance and variation, and just a lot less static. Right now it just feels like, okay, you're either a Western European nation, a Middle Eastern nation, a Far Eastern nation, or an African nation, and that's the look across the whole map. Or then obviously like a Norse nation. So I like this, that it's going to be able to bring a lot of aesthetics together and a lot of different play styles to really make CK3 evolve. So I'm stoked to see what we get with the Royal Courts DLC that they said is going to be out sometime later this year. My guess is probably September timeline, around then. So we'll see as that comes out, and we will definitely be covering more, guys. I really want to jump into more CK3. I've got a stream series I'm thinking of doing here where we reform Rome, starting in Italy, capturing the Empire of Italy, expanding east into Byzantium, and then ending with taking all of the lands of the Levant and North Africa and reforming Rome. Kind of similar to Justinian's reign in the Eastern Roman Empire. So stay tuned for that. That's probably going to be coming out on the channel. If not, it's probably going to come out next week. So be on the lookout for that. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, all that fun action. But have a good one and take care.